If you have your Bible or a device tonight, I invite you to open up to 1 Samuel chapter 29. 1 Samuel chapter 29. We have, of course, been in 1 Samuel for the lion's share of 2025. We have gotten through, we talked about this a couple Wednesday nights ago when we covered Philemon, kind of impromptu covered Philemon, but we were able to get through 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John earlier in the year. Then we started into Samuel, and of course we crossed Philemon off just because we had a night to tackle Philemon. But we are almost through the book of 1 Samuel. We'll touch on this a little. Of course, next week we'll be gone. Logan's going to cover and look through chapter 30. And then, Lord willing, the first Sunday night of 2026, we will wrap up in chapter 31. And I encourage you to go ahead and start looking into 2 Samuel, because this is going to be, of course, where we're going to continue right into. And in many ways is a continuation of this narrative. And we're going to chapter 29 that we're going to cover tonight is one of the shortest in 1 Samuel. So another little gift, you get to hear me a little bit less right at the end of the year. But what I hope to do is we'll go through 29 like we always do. And then what I'd like for you to do when you have some time and maybe you're at home over Christmas holiday, you got your Bible out, be reading 30, 31, and then get into chapter 2 Samuel. And we'll I'll set you up with a little bit of some themes. Logan's going to cover 30 next week. 31 is going to wrap us up in a really transformative way we're going to see in David, because like a lot of things in life, things have to get a little bit worse before they get better, and that's going to be David's case here, right? You would have thought that he would have learned his lesson by this point. We're going to get even more confirmation in the text in 29 that David's going to spend kind of extended time with the Philistines. He's going to get another opportunity to leave, and we're going to see David's decision-making. But, again, we talked about hope this morning. There is always hope, and we're going to see that towards the end of this narrative together. Okay, so remember, David has kind of come to a low point in many ways. Remember, he's been on the run for chapters now as we've went through 1 Samuel. Been on the run from Saul, and kind of gets to a point where he's saying, I'm tired. Probably just put a period there. I'm tired. I'm tired of being on the run from Saul. I'm tired of not seeing my family. Again, this is Keaton's editorialization, but this is what the text is pointing us to. I'm just tired. I'm wore out. I'm tired of being on the run from Saul. So I'm going to go to the least likely place, the place where Saul will quit pursuing me, but of course is at the spiritual detriment. He's going to go to the enemy of God, to the enemy of the Israelites, at least one of, the Philistines. David has become known, right? He is the giant slayer. He kills Goliath. They're going to even reference that as we continue in the narrative. But he is, they think, right? And this is the great kind of tension that's in this point is David defecting, right? Has David grown tired, growing weary of the God of Israel, and now come over to the side of the Philistines? And we looked at that last week in chapter 28. And then, again, last week is Saul, the kind of unusual, unique chapter in 28 where the medium kind of raises Samuel back from the dead and gives Saul even more news of, Saul, your time is coming to an end. We've kind of had the benefit of almost reading in as the narrator, so to speak. We're seeing things as they've already happened, so we know that God has already anointed David, that the Spirit of the Lord has left Saul, and then we kind of, again, get an indication that Saul now has proof positive that this is coming rapidly to an end. All right, but let's read 29 together. It's only 11 verses. This won't take us super long, but we'll work through the text like we always do. Let's read the first 3 verses together. Now the Philistines had gathered all their forces at Aphek, and the Israelites were encamped by the spring that is Jezreel. Now remember, in 27 and in 28, Israel and the Philistines had been kind of, peacocking, postulating right at the border there. They had been pushing back and forth, trying to intimidate the other off the battle line, is what is happening. And so the Philistine king is now coming to David and saying, David, you've been telling us all along that you've been fighting and taking down all of Israel's forces. Why don't you come do that with the big guys, right? We're calling you up from single A. Come do it with, the major league team, so to speak. Because they think that that's what again, by David's own admission, this is not their inference, this is what David has told them, why don't you come fight with us? But now, rubber's going to meet the road because they are ready to fight, and we'll see how David responds to this. So they had gathered all their forces, verse 2, as the lords of the Philistines were passing on by hundreds and by thousands, and David and his men were passing on in the rear with Achish. The commanders of the Philistines said, "What are these Hebrews doing here?" And Achish said to the commanders of the Philistines, "Is this not David, the servant of Saul, king of Israel, who has been with me now?" Now pay attention to this. I hope you'll notice, I hope you'll highlight this in your Bible. Every time we highlight or notate something in the Bible is not just because, hey, this is great, what an encouraging verse. This I want you to highlight to remind yourself of spiritual drift. This right here, again, by my estimation, because listen to what a Philistine king is describing of David, a man after God's own heart, who is in line to be the king of Israel. And listen to how the king describes David. "What are these Hebrews doing here? Is this not David, the servant of Saul, king of Israel, who has been with me now for days and years, and since he deserted to me, I, the Philistine king, have found no fault in him to this day." David, the spiritual well in David is dry at the moment. Again, highlight this. This is a man that has as much connection, and in an amazing way, a more literal connection to God even than we have the privilege of today, and still drifted away. If any Christian, again, we're not in the Christian age here, but broadly speaking, we're talking about followers of God. David in the Old Testament, Christians in the New, but it's a similar principle. If we ever feel like, I can't drift that far, right? And you can say all the whatever. I grew up in church. I read my Bible every day. I come to church. David did all those things. David won victory after victory after victory, defeated Goliath with the hand of God helping him, and gets so low because of his circumstances that he goes and spends time with the enemy. And the enemy is so confident because of David's actions or lack thereof that the enemy, again, using kind of ambiguous language here because I want you to make the spiritual parallel. The enemy, as far as Israel's concerned, tells the other enemies, don't worry about David. David's good. David's deserted. David's with me. David's been here for months. I've never seen anything that would speak to contrary that David is with us. David's in a spiritual drought. So the Philistines are gathering together all their armies. But again, David has kind of spent time with a select group in the Philistines, but the lords of the Philistines, because remember, this is big army. These are not what they would describe as skirmishes. These are not little battles. We're now going to talk about the Philistine army going toe-to-toe with Israel, big scale. So all the Philistine commanders are coming together. And again, David is amongst them. He's discouraged. He left the people of God. But now he's where nobody would have ever suspected the next king of Israel to be. He's amongst the ungodly, ready to fight God's people. What are these Hebrews doing here? But it's interesting to me that the Philistine leaders are seeing what David has become blind to, right? David's become blind to the fact that his actions, or lack thereof, his words, or lack thereof, his everything is pointing to an allegiance to somewhere that isn't God. David's become numb to this, but everybody else seems to be able to see it. But the Philistine leaders knew this. Is this not David, who's been with me all this time? Again, such a sad thing to describe David this way. But again, Achish isn't just making this up. Go back to chapter 28, the first two verses. David himself says these words, right? I'm here and I'm with you. Let's keep reading, 4 and 5. But the commanders of the Philistines were angry with him. And the commanders of the Philistines said to him, send the man back, that he may return to the place to which you have assigned him. He shall not go down with us to battle, lest in the battle he become an adversary. For how could this fellow reconcile himself to his Lord? Would it not be with the heads of the men here? Is not this David, of whom they sing to one another in dances? Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Now, the irony of this is, let's map all this out. Remember, David is in the encampment of the Philistines because he's on the run from Saul. He's on the run from Saul because Saul is growing paranoid, because David continues to rise in popularity, right? Because David is with God. David's obedient to God, save a couple chapters here, but up to this point, he's been obedient to God. And the irony is the thing that the Philistines are going to now kick him out for is also the thing that Saul is chasing him for, right? Saul has his thousands. Even the Philistines have heard this. And David's got his tens of thousands. David's fame has grown so large that even the enemies know these stories. These are not Israelite fables anymore. This is now oral history that's being told in a region. The Philistines are confirming this. But the princes of the Philistines were angry. They didn't trust David. Again, is this not the David who killed our champion? Remember, Goliath, the defeat of Goliath is not that far removed. This would have been something that they very much would have probably been alive for, if not, they certainly would have been alive to hear about it. They don't trust David. So now David is going to have to make a choice. Let's read 6 and 7. Then Achish called David and said to him, as the Lord lives, you have been honest to me, and it seems right that you should march out in with me in the campaign, for I have found nothing wrong in you from the day of your coming to me to now. Nevertheless, the Lords do not approve of you, so go back now and go peaceably, that you may not displease the Lord of the Philistines. Surely as the Lord lives. It's an interesting phrase to say, because again, look in your text. The Lord is capital L. It's an interesting oath for a Philistine leader to make, but certainly one that David can appreciate. Again, is it that he somehow come to David's way of thinking on this? Or is he being courteous to David to not make him swear by the Philistine gods? More than likely, it's probably the latter, but nonetheless, it's still a grammatical curiosity within the text. But it says, nevertheless, the Lords don't find favor with you. Again, trying David, what's interesting here, David doesn't have a home. David is on the run, right? He is on the run because he's too good to go home. Saul will kill him at home, right? But he's not bad enough to stay with the enemy. He's in the middle. That's a tough place to be, right? And one that I think David's going to learn the hard way. Chapter 30 is going to teach him the hard way, that there's consequences for being in the middle. There's consequences, again, being in the middle in all of life is not a bad thing. But spiritually speaking, there's consequences for being lukewarm, for having one foot in each camp. God's going to teach that to David the hard way in chapter 30. We'll preview that a little bit at the end here. But again, David, like any of us, doesn't like to be rejected. But again, David is at the valley in many ways. Again, David's the one who fought Goliath over and over and over again, but he's going to send him away. So let's read 8 through 10. And David said to Achish, but what have I done? What have you found in your servant from this day that I entered your service until now, that I may not go and fight against the enemies of my Lord the King? Just remember, this text exists. When we talk, when we preach, when we consider David, now, David is going to be redeemed. David is going to have a lot of loss that's going to teach him some of this obedience and humility and reminding him who is actually in charge. But again, we set David on a pretty high pedestal, and rightfully so, because he does a lot in the name of the Lord. He does a lot obedient that propels the cause. But remember, 1 Samuel 27, 28, and 29 exist. David's not a perfect man. None of us are. I tell you this with confidence that when you and I feel like I can't ever, right, rack up, I don't feel like I'm good enough. David wasn't either. David, the man that is as closely aligned with the heart of God as any mortal that we know of, maybe save Job, but he is in an elite class. We'll leave it at that. But he still has his 1 Samuel 27, 28, and 29 moments. And we will too. But what have I done? What have you found in your servant from the day I entered your service until now, that I may not go and fight against the enemies of my Lord the King? And Achish answered David and said, I know that you are blameless in my sight and as an angel of God. Nevertheless, the commanders of the Philistines have said, he shall not go up with us to battle. Now then, rise early in the morning with your servants of your Lord who came with you, and start early in the morning and depart as soon as you have light. So David set out with his men early in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines. But the Philistines went up to Jezreel. His drought's not over. Again, he's now been rejected by the leaders of the Philistines. They say, go home. You don't have a place here. You're not one of us, right? In spite of the fact that some of the leadership says, no. His words and his actions, he's been with us a while. He's good. But again, he's not a Philistine. What have I done? Again, you can almost hear the disappointment, right? What have I done? Have I not proven myself? Have I not proven myself to be amongst you? Guys, this is David. But he says, go home. But David, instead of going home, returns back to Ziklag, the stronghold where he was having camp, and the Philistine army prepare to meet Saul. This should have been a wake-up call. Should have been. But David doesn't treat it as that. David treats it as a blip in the road, and he's going to keep on doing what he thinks he needs to do. But I'll tell you this, chapter 30 is coming, where loss and hurt are going to shake David loose. Again, we could go, we've taught lessons on why does God allow things to happen, why does God, again, that's not the point of this. But in the grandest sense, whether we're talking about judgment or whether we're talking about things on this side of eternity, when God gives us opportunities to grow and to be better and to repent and turn away and to come back to him, friends, we should take him up on it. Because I promise you, again, as will follow me here, chapter 30 is coming. Whether we're talking about judgment in the grandest sense, whether we're talking about consequence on this side of eternity, chapter 30 is coming. God gives us opportunities to get off the highway. Right, we have exits we can take. David didn't take it. We're going to see what happens there. Again, but the interesting part, and again, I don't want to encroach on Logan next week, but the interesting part is that in 30, when loss and hurt happens, is also where David is restored, where David comes back. And that can happen for us too. Again, he's strengthened. While David and his men are away, the Amalekites are going to come and raid Ziklag. They're going to burn it. They're going to carry away the women, the children. David's going to be left with nothing. But chapter 30 and verse 6 I love. But David strengthened himself in the Lord. That's the beauty of 30. And then 31, we'll see the end of the reign of Saul. Again, read these on your own because, again, David, here's the beauty of the last two chapters. David is going to seek the Lord. He's going to find strength, and then he's going to find his restoration. Saul, by contrast, is going to continue to avoid God. He's going to spiral into despair and hurt, and he's going to ultimately end in defeat. And again, we're going to map these out perfectly. There's parallels for us today. But as we wrap up tonight, and my last time speaking to you this year, 3 things out of chapter 29. God can redeem us even when we make wrong decisions. David finds himself in the heart of the Philistines. Again, this is a little bit foreshadowing what's coming. But David should not have been in Philistine territory, much less marching against Israel. But God used discernment. He used his to encourage the Philistine commanders to keep David from participating. You might ask, what would have happened had they accepted his willingness to fight? I don't know. None of us know. Again, we're talking about things that didn't occur. But David's life would have been forever different because David probably would have never become king. If he goes as far as fighting against Israel with the Philistines, who's to know how that would turn out? But God saves him in reality, even when he is neck deep in poor choice. Again, sometimes God rescues us not because we choose wisely, but because of his mercy. The closed door that David did not ask for, I see it as God's protection. That's still very much true in our life. There are doors that will close to you that you will not understand. It's happened in my life. It's probably happened in yours, that are God's providential care. We may not see it in the moment. David certainly didn't, but he will be thankful one day. Number 2, God's sovereignty works through unlikely people. Again, Achish trusted David. He's a pagan Philistine leader, but God uses these folks to be the ones to stop David in his tracks, and ultimately, kind of in a roundabout way, are going to bring David back to restoration. They're going to bring him low, they're going to bring him humble, and then David's going to come back to God. Again, God is not limited to the traditional vessels. God utilizes that, but we've done series after series after series. We just went through the Judges. God uses imperfect people to accomplish his goal. And that includes, at this moment, the Philistines. And then lastly, God can preserve our integrity even when we risk losing it. David leaves without drawing a sword against God's people. His reputation was shaky at the moment, but his hands remained clean. God protected him. He protected his integrity. The one thing he probably could not have earned back. He will earn back his reputation. He will earn back the other things. But had he pulled a sword against Israel, I don't think there's a turning back from that. And God protected him even when he didn't see it. Again, this is David, one of the lowest points of David's life. But sometimes God pulls us back before we cross a line we can't undo. God's mercy often shows up just before our greatest regret. Let him pull us back. Tonight, if you aren't a Christian, we talked this morning about Jesus is our greatest hope. He is the best hope against any alternative. Again, David is at a point right now in his life where he is at as low as, I don't want to say he'll ever be. We'll see that in 2 Samuel. David's going to get brought low again, but David's in a hardship. But ultimately, his victory is going to come not in his decisions, but in his willingness to come back to God, to come back in obedience and say, Lord, if you'll take me back, I want to come home. The prodigal son talks about that same story, right? That you and I may go far away, but we're welcome back home if we will come, right? That's our part in it. We have to walk that walk back, but the Father's waiting for us. Tonight, if you have any need, come let us know about it as we stand and as we sing.